working on energy and climate issues. He's currently the principal of Polaris Strategy Plus Insight. Dan's also a board chair of the BC Centre for Innovation and Clean Energy. And he's also an advisor to the Clean Economy Fund. But most recently, Dan was one of two panel members tasked with undertaking a review of CleanBC, which he will share more about momentarily. So welcome, Dan.
Morning, everybody, and thanks, Megan, for the introduction and for the invitation to be here with all of you today. So as Megan mentioned, Marin Smith and I were asked by the BC government to undertake an independent review of CleanBC, which is the province's climate plan, which was first developed in 2017, launched in 2018, went through an updating in 2020 into 2021. And the origins of that review actually came from the agreement between the BC Greens and the BC NDP following the last provincial election, that it was time to do a review and assess what was working, what wasn't, and what next for work on climate and clean energy in the province. So Marin Smith and I were tasked to undertake that independent review over the course of about 6 months. I think one thing I would say contextually is that when this review was first conceived of, that was before President Trump had been sworn into office, the tariffs, et cetera. So, already there was a sense that there was a need for a review of the plan, but that really crystallized that much more as last year unfolded in terms of the new circumstances we had politically, economically, fiscally for the government, geopolitically. So it was an opportune time for us to hear from British Columbians as to kind of the state of play, and then to reflect on what could some of the practical next steps be for the government of BC on this important file. So over the course of that review, we met with 157 organizations. We had nearly 300 written submissions. And these were 20-page, very substantive submissions. This was not just kind of, should we do more on climate or should we do less on climate? This was very thoughtful, substantive contributions from stakeholders who have been involved in developing, implementing, or on the receiving end of the broad suite of policies and programs that fall under CleanBC. There was also a public engagement portal, received over 2,600 submissions from that. We engaged with Indigenous leadership organizations and received submissions from individual nations. And we had multiple engagement with the Climate Solutions Council, which is the government-appointed advisory council to the government on climate change. So just to reflect back a little bit about what we heard when it came specifically to jobs and workforce planning, I think that the top line message is that CleanBC was seen to be driving significant job creation across the economy and across the province in everything from clean energy supply, biofuels, through to electricians and HVAC installers, and even more broadly in terms of technology innovation and continuing to support BC's competitiveness where we punch above our weight in clean tech in particular. But one of the things that was flagged consistently is that the plan that was originally promised in the original CleanBC was reiterated in the roadmap in 2020 and had been mentioned in numerous other government policies or strategy documents. The promise of a clear workforce plan to ensure that we have the workers that we need and that we're also transitioning workers who might be impacted by some climate policies, that plan has never actually materialized. And so there's a disconnect between the rhetoric on not just on job creation, but on what would be done to support filling those jobs, making sure that we have the skilled workforce, making sure that workers are supported through that hadn't been adequately delivered. And there was quite a bit of disappointment and frustration on the part of stakeholders. And to be clear, this didn't just come from organized labor. So we did meet with the BC Federation of Labor and probably close to 24 of their members. But we were also hearing this significantly from all sectors within the private sector. We heard this from builders and developers. We heard this from people in the electricity space, in the gas utility space, this sense that there was this momentum and there was this clarity in terms of policies and programs from CleanBC, but that hadn't then translated into a coherent kind of workforce development, workforce evolution strategy so that they could all be assured that they would have the workers that they needed. And they felt like they were often competing for workers or unable to fill positions. And that's that stream of making sure that we've got the trained and skilled workforce we need, that had really fallen by the wayside. And the consequence of that, we were told, is that the lack of that skilled labor actually could curtail the progress, and some of which is by regulation that CleanBC was driving across the economy. In particular, that was seen to be particularly acute when it comes to the renewable energy sector. So BC Hydro has once again begun procuring wind and solar projects. Those are being done in partnership with Indigenous nations as equity partners. But there's a lack of confidence that there's going to be the skilled construction workforce to be able to build that out at the pace and scale that is in BC Hydro's plans, including their procurement plans. And this is not something that's unique to BC. There's actually a national shortage. And so in that regard, we're actually competing with other jurisdictions for that skilled workforce. One of the things we wanted to do in our final report was really ground it in principles that reflected what we heard from all of that consultation. And because a lot of what we heard was, some of the friction points or where there was grit in the gears that was making kind of the implementation and the success of CleanBC more challenging or more politically fraught. And so we wanted to ground our advice in principles that reflected some of those sensitivities and could be used as a touchstone for government when thinking through what next in terms of prioritizing policies or programs or government spending. So I'm not going to go through them all, but just to say that was the genesis of these principles. And and if you can look across these, you can see the relationship, how these might interact with making sure that we've got the workforce that we need, and also being cognizant of how that workforce is going to evolve over time and how that might be different in one part of the province versus another part of the province. So we identified 7 kind of high-level priorities for action, and if you do go and take a look at the final report, nested under each of these are then very specific recommendations, including proposed timelines or milestones for them. The one, of course, to key in here is this opportunity and obligation to leverage the advantages and the opportunities we have to create more jobs and to capture that economic opportunity and to have that employing British Columbians, and that those British Columbians have the skills that they need. Another thing that we heard and that is kind of embedded across these priorities for action is the need for policy clarity and ultimately the need for certainty. So whether we're talking about our utilities or whether we're talking about the private sector, a prerequisite to be able to plan for investments, to plan for the kind of jobs and the kind of skills that are going to be needed is to have a longer runway of policy certainty and clarity. So many of the policies and programs from that first 2018 edition of CleanBC had a time horizon that often went to about 2030, or some that extended beyond 2030 hadn't yet actually been finalized. And so here we are now in 2026, 2030 is just around the corner. And so for those that are contemplating making investments, for those that are considering adding new seats in training programs, not knowing what the future is going to look like beyond 2030 becomes very challenging in terms of having the confidence to allocate resources and plan for that future. So extending that time horizon out to ideally 2040 would begin to give that clarity that's needed so that all of those folks can confidently plan for the future that's coming. Specific to some of the opportunities related to jobs, of course, a lot of this is about making sure that we've got the domestic workforce of British Columbians that have the skills that they need. And this requires an alignment of labor market outlooks with workforce development plans, and then, of course, making sure that you've got that pipeline on the training side to ensure that you've got the workers with the skills you need when you need them. We also recommended a clean economy diversification fund using a portion of royalties from gas production to help support these types of initiatives around building the workforce that we need. have some suggestions around leaning into BC's technology strength. So recognizing that quite apart from all of the work that we have to do building in the province, we do have a clean tech ecosystem that punches above its weight globally. And to continue to foster that because of the good jobs that it creates in developing those technologies, but also to the extent that there are jobs associated with deploying all of those technologies across the province. And then last but not least, to double down on the Youth Climate Corps, which again creates somewhat of a funnel in terms of future workforce. And that's it. So thank you very much. And I'm not sure, Megan, are we doing questions or no?
I'll keep saying those men.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thank you.